Welcome back to In the Gym. I'm your host, Michael Petrella. Today we have a fantastic guest, Roger Schwab. Roger was the owner and creator of Mainline Health and Fitness. He was an IFBB head judge. He's an author, a trainer, and now currently the owner of XForce Philadelphia, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in the show. Roger, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you, Michael. It's good to talk to you again. Good to see you again.
The one thing that we like to ask our guests when we get started is, how did you get into resistance training? How did you get into it in the first place? And also, in your case, how did you get into the industry as a business?
Okay, well, I I got interested in fitness or strength. It was really only strength training. That was the only thing that interested me way back when, and is still my main concern today. Um, I was about 14 when I saw Steve Reeves play Hercules in the first Hercules movie. And I had always been really skinny and I wanted to play football and I wanted to get bigger and stronger to play football. So I kind of set out on my own at the time. There was nobody really to instruct me. And so the first venture was into Olympic lifting, and that was a passion. Um, I got quite proficient in it. However, my joints of my body did not like it quite as much as my passion. And I wound up getting hurt. So I went from the frying pan to the fire in powerlifting. And I was always trying to demonstrate strength instead of building strength. I don't know why, but I did everything backwards. And powerlifting was just as bad for my spine, my cervical, my thoracic and lumbar spine, as was Olympic lifting. And by the time I was 19 years old, and probably the first strength training coach in the United States at Penn State, I also found it very difficult to be able to sit down or get up in one motion. And although there was no MRIs at the time, a lateral X-ray showed major degenerative change in my cervical and lumbar spine. Only then did I look for and seek out a safer, smarter way for me to train. Maybe not for everybody, but for me. And that led me to my gaining knowledge and then meeting Arthur Jones, who completely changed my life and was my mentor for over 30 years.
And for those who don't know who Arthur Jones is, he's the legendary inventor of Nautilus and had an unbelievable impact in making the fitness industry what it is today. So you are looking for a different path, a different methodology of training, and eventually you start Mainline, which was Mainline Nautilus in the early days, then became Mainline Health and Fitness. How did that all become a passion for you and such a big part of your life?
Well, sometimes, as Arthur Jones said, you don't learn by your successes, you learn by your failures. But I started Mainline Nautilus in 1976 with 9 Nautilus machines. And I loved training people. And it was a tremendous environment. We train young athletes, older athletes, men, women. We always train both sexes, and we always train them exactly the same. In 1977, though, a friend of mine who was a distributor of Stairmaster introduced Stairmaster into our club. And immediately we started to prosper more with the Stairmasters than with Nautilus. Then came the treadmills, and then came the elliptical machines. And I found myself in it for not the same reasons that I started. And even though I was more successful financially, I was not as successful mentally or with my passion. And my passion was still with strength training. I never walked into a gym without the express desire to get stronger, to make progress. Results were always it for me. And I found that I could get similar cardio results, flexibility results from my strength training, because Nautilus machines, if they were used correctly, which they seldom were because in most facilities they were not supervised, could enhance your flexibility, your heart-lung efficiency, and your strength training all in one workout. That same philosophy that I believed in way back in 1976. It's still the cornerstone of my beliefs in 2020 at XForce Philadelphia.
When Mainline was at its peak under your ownership, what had it become in terms of size, in terms of staff? It was one of the best equipped facilities, certainly in the US, maybe in the world at the time.
Definitely at one time, we did a lot of innovative things. We were the first women's bodybuilding club in the country. Our women posed at the Night of the Champions in New York City. We trained the 1980 Olympic women's swimming team. We trained the 1984 United States women's field hockey team. We trained, of course, as you know, Mike Mentzer, and I guess you're going to want to talk about that later. We eventually had over 100 Nautilus and MedX pieces of equipment. We had tons of free weights, basically centered around squats, bench presses, military presses, rows, all the heavy basic exercises. Plus, at one time, we had 50, 60 treadmills, same amount of Stairmasters, elliptical machines, stationary bikes, both upright and recumbent, everything you could think of. We had yoga classes, we had spinning classes eventually. We had it all. We were the quintessential big box gym. I would love to tell you that was making me happier, but it really wasn't. I was trying to stay in business with all the competition. And you kind of had to look at one of two things. Do you give people what they want, or do you give people what they need? And my first thought was always giving people what they want. And I succumbed to giving people, what they need. That was my first choice. But I succumbed to giving people what they wanted also. Now I can do both, because with the uniqueness of XForce, I'm giving people what they need, in my opinion, and definitely what they want by the uniqueness and really the breakthrough that XForce, in my opinion, is, the technological breakthrough that XForce is.
That's great, Roger. We're going to go to a commercial break, and we come back. We're going to talk a little bit more about what Roger means with some of this equipment. We're back with Roger Schwab. And one of the things I want to ask you about, Roger, you were a head IFBB judge. And for those who may not know, the IFBB is the absolute pinnacle of bodybuilding. It is the NHL, NBA, MLB of bodybuilding. So you were right there looking at some of the best contestants, the best bodybuilders on the planet. How did you get into that? And maybe you could talk briefly about some of the memorable contests that you were a part of.
In 1974, 1973, there was some physique contests in the East Coast and in Ohio. And Jim Mannion, who is now the head of the NPC, Wayne DeMilla, who is now part of the IFBB, and myself became friends. We basically came up together. We didn't know each other, but we connected. And between the three of us, we all expressed our desire to be involved. Taking a step back further, in 1962, I sat in the last row of the Brooklyn Academy of Music and watched Larry Scott win the IFBB Mr. America. I was 17 years old. And at that time, I said, this is a passion in my life, and I'm going to become involved. And when I do so, I'm 100%er. Either I do it 100% or I don't do it at all. So from that moment on, I was directed that I was going to be part of the bodybuilding community. And when I met Wayne and Jim, we got into heavy discussions, and the IFBB was looking for qualified judges. And so the three of us did some small contest judging, and we were judged accordingly and got high marks. And we started judging on a professional level in 1975. And then from there on, the Night of the Champions started, I believe in 1977, that Wayne DeMilla was the promoter. And I was now in the big time with Jim Mannion and we were judging big events. Oscar State and Joe Weider, seeing my performance, asked me to be part of the international judging panel, and I became the assistant head judge of the IFBB to Bill Pearl. You might know that name since he was one of the greatest bodybuilders of all time, Mr. America in 1963 and three-time Mr. Universe. When Bill retired in 1979, I became the head judge of the IFBB. I judged Mr. Olympia contest and Miss Olympia contest from 1977 to 1982, of which time I retired to be with my wife, my then girlfriend, who became my wife several years later, and I retired. But I judged Bill Clem, who was an umpire in the major leagues, who said I never got one wrong. I can't say that. I got many wrong. I judged to the best of my ability, but my legacy will always be that I was a head judge in 1981 at the most controversial Mr. Olympias of all time, and I recused myself in 1980, the second most controversial Olympia of all time, because prior to the 1980 contest, I trained Mike Mentzer at Mainline Health and Fitness, and I thought it was the ethical thing to do. In retrospect, I could have changed the course of history of the IFBB and professional bodybuilding if, one, I was a voting judge in 1981 instead of just being the head judge, and two, if I hadn't recused myself in 1980. So there you have it, Michael. I really enjoyed that part of my life. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I think for the most part, the contestants thought I was a fair judge. I always stayed around after the contest to answer questions. I know I was respected, and that's about all you can ask for in a very subjective sport where you're trying to give an objective judging.
Talking about some of those bodybuilders, you had mentioned that you had trained Mike Mentzer. I'd like to hear a little bit about how you did train him for the 1980 Olympia, because most feel that he was in his best condition, his best shape ever. And also maybe who were some of the other golden age bodybuilders that trained at Mainline during that time stretch?
Well, you know, at that time stretch, since I was involved with the IFBB, I made a lot of journeys out to the West Coast and at Gold's Gym in both Venice and Santa Monica. John Balick was a very close friend of mine. Subsequently, John became the publisher of Iron Man magazine. But we spent a lot of time at Gold's Gym, and I knew all the bodybuilders, and they all knew me because I was a judge. I had the pleasure of training Casey Theater. I trained Danny Padilla. I trained Ray Mentzer, and I trained Mike Mentzer. And the ironic thing is I trained every single one in the exact same manner. To me, the most efficient, medically sound way for any bodybuilder and any non-bodybuilder, man or woman, to train is what Arthur Jones originally called the pre-exhaust style of training. Arthur didn't originate or coin the term, but he put it to its best use. And pre-exhaust basically means that you're doing a single joint movement that isolates as best as possible a major muscular structure. And then immediately following the single joint isolated movement, you do a compound movement that again involves the targeted musculature along with different muscle groups. This is exactly the way Mike trained Ray, Casey, and Danny. They could have trained any way they wanted to. I didn't suggest the programs. They suggested the programs. I might add, at the time when I trained Mike, Casey, and Ray, we had a ton of free weights, and they could have trained any way they wanted to. But outside of barbell squats, they only wanted to train on the Nautilus equipment. And we trained the largest body parts to the smallest, and we trained the whole body in a 12 to 14 exercise sequence. You know exactly the sequence, Michael, because when I trained you on XForce, you went through the exact same routine.
That's fantastic. I think a lot of people are going to get some knowledge from your wisdom there. we're going to come back from commercial break and we're going to dive into this XForce that Roger has alluded to. And I'm going to also add some of my personal opinions because I did make the pilgrimage down to Bryn Mawr, and now Roger's in Philadelphia, where he uses this state-of-the-art equipment, and we're going to share it with you next.
Ready to go?
You are. Hold. 1. Just the front of the body. 2. Let it move. That's good. Some of them are a little trickier than others, but it feels your sense of movement. As soon as you move, it goes. Hold. 3. Form's perfect.
We're back with Roger Schwab, owner of XForce Philadelphia, and we've been talking about XForce a little bit earlier in the show. We're going to dive into it a little bit more now. I actually made the trip down to Roger's facility to try these machines, and they were unbelievable. Essentially, they make the negative or lowering portion of the exercise about 40% harder or 40% more resistance than when you're lifting. So the muscle's never taking a break. And Roger expertly trained me. It was a fantastic experience. And I just want to hear a little bit more from you, Roger. How do these XForce machines work, and how did you get involved with them?
I got involved in 2008 when XForce from Sweden showed this equipment in California, and again in 2009, and it piqued my interest enough that I went to Sweden subsequently and worked with the engineer and the orthopedic surgeon who basically developed these machines. I was introduced really by Ellington Darden, who had gone to Sweden in 2008 and came back and told me, this equipment is something like you've never seen before. Arthur Jones had shown in his studies that a muscle has 3 levels of strength: the positive strength, the negative strength, and the static strength. The positive strength was real strength minus friction, and the negative strength was your real strength plus friction, and your only true strength is static strength. So if there's 3 levels of strength, he found that the lowering or the negative part of the movement, a fresh muscle is approximately 40% stronger. So if you're capable of pushing 100 pounds over your head for 1 repetition, you're capable, a fresh muscle, of lowering 140 pounds. Well, I was intrigued by this. And when I utilized the machines the first time, the transition from positive to negative was so smooth that it was like a revelation to me, a technological breakthrough. And if it was used correctly, and in my opinion, supervised, it created a much deeper inroad into starting strength than conventional equipment. And I want to make this point before I go any further. Gym owners today who are utilizing Nautilus and MedX machines, while I think the XForce equipment stimulates a deeper inroad, that does not negate the tremendous value of Nautilus and MedX. I love that equipment. And if I didn't have XForce, I would still be using Nautilus and MedX. I just have the luxury, after years of training and being able to afford this equipment, and I want it to be unique, and I wanted to bring this to the United States. But again, it does not at all detract from serious supervised clubs that are training people with Nautilus and MedX, which in my opinion is medically sound equipment. It is so important for people to train medically sound that they never get injured. Because if you're on the shelf, you're not going to get results. Demonstrating strength never works. But working a muscle through its full range of motion under control, and then XForce's brand is 315, but it can be 4-4 or 3-3 or whatever under supervision. Chances are somebody's not going to get hurt. Pre-exhaustion makes it even safer because you're doing a primary movement before the compound movement, so you're always assuring yourself that the forces that you're imposing are never going to be too great. A lot of people just do push-pull compound exercises, and it certainly stimulates a response. But I think in the long term, as you age, joint stress accumulates silently, and you have a much better chance of staying on target and in the gym if you're training instead in pre-exhaust type of training.
That's excellent. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your new facility. Now, I always found this a very interesting thing about you, Roger. You, in many ways, hit the pinnacle of a big box gym in terms of size, in terms of equipment, in terms of memberships, but you felt that this wasn't your pure vision anymore, and you essentially sold it to start another gym that was smaller, but much closer to what your vision of an exercise routine and a gym should look like. And I'm curious if you could share that with some of the viewers.
In 2015, when my wife and I sold the gym, it was our intention to probably retire and go on our way. And we had really, I think, made a difference in our lives. But we moved down to Center City, Philadelphia, and I don't know if it's ego or what it could be, but I felt like there was still more to give and there was still more to achieve. And so we both decided to do exactly what we wanted to do, to open up a small personal training facility with state-of-the-art equipment that we were passionate about, and not to expand into another big box gym, to keep it personal training. And except for the machines that XForce didn't make, which were a hip extension and a neck machine, basically, we stuck with XForce. We did purchase the MedX medical cervical extension machine, and we did get a next generation hip extension machine. And I remember, Michael, I always went to you first to find out where I could find these things, and you were always there for me. I never take that for granted. So now I feel that we have a complete facility. We have about 29 machines, 25 of which are XForce machines. And now we can give people what I think every workout is the best that I know how to do it after more than 50 years of training athletes, non-athletes, men and women. And if I can make anything really clear, it's this. Strength training is the most important type of training for anyone. Any athlete, non-athlete, men and women, everybody, free of injury, should be training exactly the same way. Not necessarily the same routine, in the same order, but under supervision, under control with the resistance, always trying to build strength and not demonstrate it, and always trying to work through a full range of motion. It's going to enhance strength, flexibility, and certainly heart-lung efficiency if you're moving through the workout at a brisk clip, and there's no reason why not to.
Roger, thank you so much for sharing that wisdom with us. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of your advice. If someone wanted to get in touch with you, say they're in the Philadelphia area, wanted to experience this workout, what's the best way they can reach you?
Well, they certainly can get me at XForce Philadelphia. That is our website, and our phone number is there also. So anybody who wants to reach me certainly can. And anybody who's interested from out of state, and since we've opened, we've had about 10 people from the HIT community from out of state just come to experience the experience. One of the last ones with Jim McBride came in from, I believe, Illinois. I think that's where he's from.
Rochester.
Yeah. Department of Rochester. Okay, I'm sorry. And you can ask him what he thought, but everybody, once they experience the experience, there's nothing quite that compares to XForce with its heavy 40% negative resistance. You're working the positive, and then you're only halfway there, because then you've got to experience the negative.
Roger, thank you very much for coming on the show. Very much appreciate you taking time and coming on today.
Thank you, Michael. I hope I see you soon. You know you're always welcome down here again. I got to come up and see you.